Tahmina, it's so good to see you, and greetings from Florida all the way to Seattle. And thank you for taking the time to share your story tonight. Just to get us started, would you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about how you came to become someone living in the United States of America?
Oh, well, my name is Tahmina Martelly, and I was born in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. And when I was, when we were growing up, Bangladesh didn't actually exist. It was part of Pakistan. So my country was part of Pakistan. It had separated, it used to be all part of India, and then India split it along kind of religious lines of Pakistan and India, and then further dividing. And so um, war started really quickly. You hear about it in the news. For us, we were having dinner. My grandparents were visiting. My aunts and uncles were there. I have two older sisters and a younger brother. And I remember somebody had told a joke and we were just laughing. I don't remember the joke. We were laughing, and within minutes, we could hear these jets flying overhead, windows just shattering, glass everywhere. You could see fire farther away. We were living in this apartment, so we were higher up, and you could see kind of fires and the sounds of like these bombs dropping. And my grandmother was screaming. Went from this laughing dinner, joking, to this our world turning upside down, and war had started. And that's the civil war that began during that time. And over the next year or so, our family, we ended up, my dad taking us to a kind of a remote village, dropping us off, coming back to the capital city, so that, if he was going to be targeted, it was going to be him and not the entire family. And we didn't know, at that time, you don't have cell phones, right? You don't have a way to communicate with each other. You don't know who is alive, who's doing well. You're hoping, putting up signs at Red Cross stations to see, if people can find information about each other. A lot of upheaval, and
How
we
old
went
were
by
you?
waterways.
How old were you at
I,
that time?
9 or
9 years
so.
old. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of, and actually that's the first time. I grew up in a very strict Muslim family, and my whole country, everybody I knew was Muslim. I didn't know there was anything else. We were sitting on a boat. We were My grandfather was sitting on the left hand side of me, and we were getting boarded this one night, and didn't have a chance to move or do anything. It was dark, it was late, and these people who were boarding our little boat, which didn't have any motorized power, and this other boat did, we didn't know who they were. They had these big, big flashlights. So they were in silhouette, and they were shining the light on each one of our faces, and they had all these automatic weapons. They were getting it ready, and they were yelling all these questions. And I don't know if you've ever been so scared where you could hear your heartbeat almost outside of your body. It was like a thunder, rolling in my ears. And I was holding my grandfather's hand, and I was at the edge of the boat. It was sloshing. The wake from the other boat was hitting on the side. And there was this drama going on. I could hear my grandmother kind of saying surahs under her breath, just, because she was so scared. And these men with the guns who were ready, we knew they were ready. And I'm holding my grandfather's hand, and I looked to the right-hand side of me, and there was this presence. I'd never seen him before, but when I looked at him, my heart rate calmed down and I could breathe again. And I knew everything was going to be okay. I pulled on my grandfather's hand to see if he could see what I was seeing. I didn't know who he was, but when God shows up, he doesn't have to introduce himself. Um, it was 7 years later. We were living in Yemen. A lot of things have happened. We moved to Yemen. 7 years, it's not coincidental, but I had got invited to this kind of a group thing with a bunch of kids, and a boy invited me. And there's no way my father was going to let me go anywhere with a boy. And I don't know what he said. It was an international school to my father, but he let me go. And it was in the basement of the American embassy. And when I walked in, and because the rules of the United States apply within the embassy, and I walked in to this basement, and there was like maybe 20 people in this room. Didn't smell very nice. They were seated. There was no furniture. They were seated on the floor, all around the wall. And when I walked into that room, I looked around and I said, "Where is he?" Because that person who was on the boat with me, I knew he was in that room. And I kept looking around and said, "Where is he?" I didn't know anything about the Holy Spirit. I didn't know anything about Jesus. And in that room, people started to explain to me about Jesus. And I said, "Oh, I know who you're talking about. I just didn't know his name.
Wow.
Um, and that's when they explained to me, all you have to do is say this prayer and you get to go to heaven. And I thought, wait, that seems like the cheater way. Are you sure? I mean, this is like a shortcut. You just say a prayer and poof, you get to go to heaven. That, how come nobody told me about this before? And this is, we're telling you now. And that began my journey into discovering Jesus, really. When I finally accepted Christ, I lost my family because they disowned me. But this is also part of my story, is this journey of not just moving from places, but moving to finding who Jesus is.
That's incredible. And so backing up a little bit, you eventually moved from that boat to, you skipped over to Yemen. Is that where you left from Bangladesh to Yemen, or what?
Yes.
How
Yeah,
did that journey
Bangladesh.
get? You eventually ended up in Seattle. So there's some pieces there that that I think you can help us connect.
Yeah, and so part of, again, the refugee journey or the asylee journey, you can go through the technical process of going through UNHCR, or United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, and applying for refugee status. Or if things are really tenuous, often you'll find families who are able to take matters into their own hand and move families. We see that with special immigrant visa holders and several others who are moving on their own.
Right.
And so what was happening with my father is he had some connections with the work that he did as an engineer. And there was some projects and other things that he needed to move his family to safety, and other channels were taking longer. And the World Bank had a project that they asked him, like they would take his whole family to safety and they could move him, and it was in Yemen. And
Wow.
That's the process we took. We had 4 suitcases, 6 family members, and we moved all the way to Yemen.
Okay.
And in Yemen, they were also going through a bloody coup at that time. So all kinds of fun things are happening. We lived in a lot of different we lived in a lot of different places. You have to learn new languages every time you move, and adjust to new and different cultures. Bangladesh is an Islamic country, 162 million people. Yemen is really Islamic. So they take that very seriously. So yeah, there's different sects of Islam, just like there's denominations in Christianity. And so, yeah, so learning all of that, learning different languages, meeting different people. And then my sisters ended up in Canada with my uncle and aunt, because it wasn't safe for them after a certain period of time living in Yemen. My brother is younger, so he stayed with my family. And then I ended up, because my family would be moving, and there would be no places for me to go to school. And so this family offered to take me in the United States. And so I got to stay with this family, and I was under 18. So I came to this small town in Idaho called Homedale, Idaho. And I do believe they have the stop sign now, or no, stop light. It's a small rural community in Homedale, Idaho.
I've been to some of those small rural communities in Idaho. I can't imagine the culture shift of a young teenage girl from Bangladesh and the Middle East, finding her way to Idaho. And did your family reunite with you there, or?
No, because they were in Yemen for part of the time, and then eventually they were back in Bangladesh. So that, because they would be moving quite a bit, so the stable places were for my sisters to be in Canada, and then for me to be. So they got the girls to safety basically, and my younger brother was young enough that he was staying with them. So the family was split into 3 different locations.
Okay, maybe fast forward a little bit. You eventually went through some type of immigration process to be in the United States. What was that like for you?
So whether you come on a student visa or a visitor's visa, so from a student visa, going through the process of, like, you can apply for asylum if there's a problem, if you can prove that you can't go back. those are your options. There's really not that many options. If you're looking at the United States immigration system, the entry system, asking for asylum when you arrive, if you're first arriving, that's a very complicated system. And even then, even back then, right? And so I came on an educational visa, and then
Okay.
to stay longer. Yeah.
Okay. And did you eventually become a U.S. citizen?
Yes.
Okay. So here you
The
are.
U.S. citizenship took a long pathway.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes a very long time.
Right. And here you are now. You live in Seattle, and especially in these times where we are, there's so much chaos going on in our nation over the conflict still over racial tension.
Mm-hmm.
Not even tension, but just the strong racist foundation that is embedded within all walks of life, it seems. What are some of the challenges that you have experienced because of your ethnic background, and even more specifically as a person of color?
So a lot of it is, so I'll give you the idea of when I first arrived in a small, again, rural town. Most people have not, in a small town in America, in the West, they hadn't encountered a lot of people of color. And those who they did encounter, who were people of color, were migrant farm workers. And the viewpoint they had of migrant farm workers, it was less than human. They were necessary because they needed them when they needed to harvest things, because they needed they needed that all hands on deck that they didn't have in small towns. But they didn't really want to deal with them. They definitely didn't want to learn any other language. They were treated like subhuman, and they often didn't have places to stay because they're coming for a season to harvest, right? And so I worked in the fields quite a bit. And so the interesting thing was finding out how people viewed me, because I was lumped in with, all brown people. So I must be. And so the first time somebody called me a spick, I didn't understand what that was, or a wetback. And I thought, what is, and I'm also learning English. So I'm like, what is this wetback? Because it's a very strong farming community. And I also wanted to earn money. And the family I live with had a working farm as well. And so a lot of the kids all had chores, and you could earn money by working on nearby, farmers paid you cash to do stuff. And so whether you're detasseling corn or changing irrigation pipes or harvesting potatoes, you would get paid cash each day for each day's work. And part of the labor force, if you're a teenager working, you're joining a labor force often of migrant farm workers. And so firsthand, I got to see how people were treated. They were obviously needed, but they were not treated like everybody else. And then often called names, often demeaned. And even when you had a break to eat something, the people who owned the land and the farmers sat separately from those who were actually doing the work. And yeah, it was just a really interesting, and the interesting thing to me even now is, without all those workers, none of those harvests would happen.
Right. Well, and I think that's more and more clear in these days, especially as we've seen the sweeping changes in immigration practices, how there is increased advocacy amongst people who otherwise may have remained silent, realizing that those frontline workers, those essential workers, really are the people who handle the production of our food. And realizing that most people aren't interested in that type of hard physical labor. And you experienced it as a young person. And I imagine that people often may have confused you as being from Latin America, because your color of hair and your eye color, and people just kind of lump everyone into one sum. So in that experience, though, you also, even now, all these years later, with your education and your marriage and your career and children, you probably still wrestle with misconceptions that people have about immigrants. What are some of the misconceptions that you have seen that people have specifically about you or immigrants that are close to you?
A lot of it is the idea that, so what's interesting to me, so I married a man from the Caribbean. He's Black. So, not African American, his race is he's Black, and I'm South Asian, so, but when people see us together, they often think of us as a unit, and then our children are perceived as Black. So it's interesting how people perceive you is how they tend to treat you, right? How you appear to someone,
Sure.
especially how you appear next to someone. So how people treat me if they don't know who my husband is also slightly different than when we are together as a unit, right? It is very, very interesting. And what I've found is it doesn't matter. And here's kind of the interesting thing that I found over time. Some of this kind of the systemic things that you see, it doesn't matter how much you love Jesus. It doesn't matter what your education is. It doesn't matter, let's say, how far you've achieved, what your resume looks like. If you happen to be in a place, not even the wrong place at the wrong time, when people make judgments about you in that place of where you happen to find yourself, none of those things matter. You're just judged totally 100% on how you appear. So I'll give you an example. This happened not too long ago. I was walking into a place with somebody who was one of my interns, a young white male, in a meeting. And every part of the meeting, people were addressing me. This is the first time I've met these group of people. They were addressing my intern every time, not me. I ran the program. It's my program because it's my intern. But because he is a white male, not even eye contact, automatically assume that he's in charge. Those type of things happen all the time. The first time we moved into, we bought a house, a lot of scrimping and saving. We purchased a home. The first person, the neighbor who came in with a plate of cookies, entered our home, and they said hello. And the first thing, and it was a gentleman. He said, "My wife couldn't come. I brought the cookies. Wanted to meet you. I am curious." He said. So he looked at my husband. He said, "So, are you a Negro? Is that how you would call yourself?" And we were both like, "What?" And so my husband said, "Do you mean my race? I guess you could call me Black, And he goes, "Oh." So then she turns to me and says, "Are you Black? You don't look as Black as him." And so I said, "Well, I'm brown, I'm South Asian, and I'm wondering where this is going." And our son, who at that time was 5 years old, came into the room and sat down on a chair, and he pulled out a dollar bill from his pocket, handed it to our son. And then he looked at both of us and looked at our son, and he goes, "So what do you call him?" He said, we call him Ryan. And so then he held out the plate of cookies and said, "Do you folks eat cookies?" And we said, "Yes." And then he said, "Okay, well," and he told us which house he left, and he left. And when he walked out the door, we looked at the plate of cookies. We took the plate of cookies together to the kitchen and quietly put it in the trash can. And that was the welcome in our neighborhood. And here's the interesting thing. I don't think any other white family in that neighborhood would have gotten that particular reception. And he, didn't want to know anything else about us, which was so interesting. Didn't want to know where we worked, but nothing, none of that.
Right. Right. Well, it's fascinating too, because, in those moments, I grew up in a very sarcastic culture, both with my family and just in the environment that I grew up in the Midwest. And, all these retort questions come to mind, like, what do you consider yourself? I don't know. Nobody has ever asked me that question as a white male. What do I consider myself? What do I call myself? I don't know.
And my kids get asked that question all the time. Where are you from? They were born here. What are you? Not who are you, but what are you?
Right.
Kind of figuring out where do you fit? Where do you belong? And so those definitely are questions that come up. Your ability is questioned, whether or not you're able to do a particular job or finish a project or do that based totally on your color.
And you're not somebody who typically would wave your resume in the air, but you're a very accomplished woman. You're a leader in your church. You're a leader in your career. You work for a world-renowned aid organization, World Relief. You are on the board of trustees for a major university in the state of Idaho. You have a lot of influence. You have a voice that people listen to. And so anyone who would see you and make judgment about you because of your skin color or because of what your children or your husband look like, they're missing out on so much. And I feel like the people that you serve with who are coming to the United States fresh from a background of pain often and a lot of transition and trauma, and you have the privilege of hearing those stories. Like, who are you? Tell me about the things that you love. And so share with us a little bit about the things that where you put your passion right now, and how does your background as an immigrant, as a person of color, as a cookie putter in the trash person, how does that affect the way that you interact, your passion? How does your passion affect the way you interact with people that are coming to the country for the first time?
Well, part of that is not only the part about cultural orientation, but making sure people come alongside. So the power of any newcomer, really welcoming the newcomer, part of that power is not assimilation as much as integration. So you can be part of something and not become part of a bigger whole, bigger picture of a community, and be empowered within that community without your identity being taken away. And I think that's the beauty of a kind of a diverse community, is we can learn so much from each other if we are different from each other. So that's the beautiful part that I think immigration brings, that this country, America, really is built on, unless you're an indigenous tribe, which, when you, in fact, the land currently I'm sitting in right now, I have to acknowledge, does not really belong to me. It belongs to the Duwamish people. I might own a piece of it, but it does not belong to me. And so I know I'm on borrowed land. It does not belong to me, especially in this area. And I know in Florida as well, it does not belong really to the people who claim it belongs to. So when you see kind of these systemic issues, what I see happening a lot of times directly play out is families who are coming in, they're looking for a place of safety, looking for a place to live that they can afford. So, we're placing people in apartments that we know that hopefully they can afford, that's safe, accessible by public transport, that they can pay the bills after our support goes away. Oftentimes—
Can I interrupt you just for a moment? So people that are watching this and listening to this later on, tell us what it is that you do in your career.
So I work for a refugee resettlement and services agency. I've done this work for a long time. I've worked for several other, what's considered a VOLAG, or a voluntary agency, who help resettle refugees, asylees, special immigrant visa holders, and other immigrants who find themselves in vulnerable positions, not necessarily vulnerable immigrants. They're just in a vulnerable position for a while. And so in that particular work, when you're resettling a newcomer, so you're helping them, finding them housing, making sure that they have access to English classes, first jobs, so that people are able to pay their own bills to the best of their ability within the first 6 months of arrival. A very short time to get somebody kind of up and on their feet. Imagine if you're in a new place, learning a new language, culture, transportation, getting your kids in school, all of that, those systems learning in this 6-month period, it would be very daunting for anyone. And so in this process, as we're also mindful of placing someone in a home, that we want to make sure that when the kind of the hour help or the funding process goes away, that they're able to, with the jobs and other things in place, pay their rent and stay housed. So you put them in a safe, affordable housing with proper access to public transportation. And often what's happened is policies that has been put in place that these people didn't have a chance to speak into, right? So a lot of these apartment complexes are built as densely as possible so that the tax base is higher. And so there's no green space around them, just parking lot and apartments. And so what happens when you have a 900 square foot apartment and you have 3 little kids? Where are the kids supposed to go? So often the kids go in the parking lot to play, and the apartment complexes will fine the families $250 if they catch their children playing in the parking lot. And the second time, $300, and the third time, eviction proceedings. So here's the thing, not only is there's a lack of green space, so it directly impacts their health, but it directly impacts on like where their children are supposed to go and play on a regular basis. And here is an apartment complex they could afford. They didn't get a chance to vote about, hey, we should like a park nearby, or we should have a green space. They didn't get to vote into that process. They're living there, and then their family is paying that price. And so you see that often over and over, these issues of kind of the environment, conservation, climate change, all of those issues directly impacting people of color, immigrants, low-income folks, because if you're not a landowner, nobody asked you to vote about any of those. And you see that systemically over and over. The local, for instance, the conservation districts, even community service block grants, all of those systems that are in place in every city, most of the rules, I bet you could check one in Florida, you have to be a landowner to be voted in, which automatically leaves out a lot of people of color, low income, all of those folks who would have a direct say in that matter. Right. So you see these kind of systemic issues all along that's set up in such a way that it will affect people that way, but they don't have a voice in it. And it's really interesting to see that play out. The same thing happened with, for instance, allocation of parks money. And this happened quite a bit, where you had allocation of parks money, that they were allocating money that was coming in from each area that was going back to the same area. If you paid taxes in your kind of this hyper local area in this part of town, it could be, it was the same town, by the way, and has these sections in the town, the tax monies that were going in, coming back to the same parks in that area. What was happening in a little bit more suburban area where it was more affluent, a little bit more white, the kids grew up and moved on, right? And as they were paying into this, the kind of the parks levy, money was coming back to them, but they didn't have that many kids using parks and parks equipment. They had a lot of extra money. In the more densely populated high-rise apartment areas, parks are used by a lot more kids in the same square footage, same area, but the money that was put in there was not proportionate to what was needed. So all they had to look at was to say, hey, the money is coming into this whole area. Where can we put it where the most need is, instead of reallocating it to the same spot? Right. So it was following along racial lines. And so that happens almost always in kind of systemically, you see that over and over.
So your role with the work that you do is to help even these people that are just coming into this home that they didn't have any say in. You're helping them acclimate to a new way of life. You used the word integration before and spoke really, I could tell that that's something that you could talk about for a while. Who was it that impacted you? Like somebody in your journey taught you the value of that in your own experience, and now you're sharing that. What did that look like? Or is that something you had to learn on your own? Maybe that was something you had a bad experience and it reflected into who you are, or what was that like for you?
Well, a lot of it is, again, I think, and I'm speaking to church culture now. So if you see, primarily a lot of churches also fall on racial lines, unfortunately. Right. You will see that some of the most segregated times are in the mornings on Sunday mornings, which is really unfortunate. And then I think people confuse biblical truths and tie the word with a cultural nuance. So for instance, my first time in a church, so remember, I didn't grow up as a Christian. My first visit to a church, and it happened to be in America, they were passing this plate, and I noticed people were putting money in it. And so I had $10 US, and I thought, oh, I can give 5, but I didn't have 2 $5 bills. I had a $10 bill. So, it was a plate full of money. So I put the $10 in there, and I took out like 5 $1 bills, and then passed it. 2 different people immediately took me aside and told me that's not to be done, right? And I still don't know where in the Bible it says
Really,
you can't make.
I've never seen that in a rule book before. So it's,
And then they told me what I should dress, like that I needed to have a particular type of um, leg covering, and this was a particular denomination you and I are familiar with, and telling me how to dress, what I should sound like right away, telling me that if I had to be Christian, I had to do these things, yet they were not biblical. They were very much how to be white. And so,
you thought Islam had a lot of rules.
which was really, really interesting to me. And because I had left a lot of rules, I learned to question that. And I thought, why is that? Hey, there is something I can read and find out more. And I would ask that question. I don't see that here. Can you show me where that is in here? I would like to do that, what it says in here, which is one of the things that back and forth, like, I don't read that here, or show me where that is. I would run across that quite a bit, definitely in church culture, and how to dress, what to say, how, there was all these rules that were not written down anywhere, that was confused with Christianity. So there's that whole issue. And then there's also, issues of when you're going to work or when you're in school. I was accepted into a kind of a high level program, and several people asked me if it was not because of my skill. They didn't congratulate me because of my achievement. They were asking me if I made it in because of affirmative action, or if I had made it in because I was a quota for color.
Right.
And those are the kind of things that assumption that somehow you must not have done this on your merit. You must have been like a percentage quota.
Oh, well, that opens up a whole other conversation that you and I should have someday, just talking about the racial disparity amongst, especially within the systems of the church. But here we are at this point. And first of all, thank you so much again for taking time to talk through some of your story. And I feel like there's people that will listen to this who are keenly aware of some of the challenges that immigrants face. But I think from your perspective specifically, because you get to hang out with folks in transition, some of the most beautiful, courageous stories of humanity. And where do you find hope today amongst immigrants?
Well, I'm going to tell you. So I run the resiliency programs. I started them. And because I call them the resiliency programs is because people are inherently resilient. It's amazing what you can go through and how you can thrive in situations that you really shouldn't be thriving. And I think often we underestimate, especially in America, people are underestimated if their language acquisition is not fast enough. So if your English language acquisition is not fast enough, you possibly can't be smart enough. So what's devalued is your experience, your skills, your other tools that people bring with them that are of incredible value, but because they can't express themselves in the primary language of the land, they're immediately devalued. And if we make space and learn from each other, it's incredible what can happen. And I see this, and I'm going to tell you this, Joel, and I've seen this over years, where you resettle somebody, and I will have resettled a family. And this happened with the Lost Boys of Sudan in the early 2000s. So they are, again, from Juba and the Juba tribes, the Dinka tribes in southern Sudan. They were displaced during the long civil war, and there were stories about them. There were young men who had lost their entire families. So a lot of those families, Somali families, those families who were being resettled, their English was, or individuals, their English was at a higher level, right? They're coming in with the same level of English. And then you would have like Croatians, Bosnians, Serbians, resettled with similar levels of English, same year, maybe even the same date. If you check on them 5 years later, and I've seen this over and over, check on them 5 years later, where you find them 5 years later is going to be vastly different. And the only difference you can pinpoint is the color of their skin. So the Serbians, the Croatians, the Ukrainians, the Russian Ukrainians, in 5 years' time, especially if they're younger kids who came in 5 years' time, their accents and everything else will be very American, right? How they're speaking. Where they find themselves 5 years down the road is very different than same kid who came from, say, Sudan or Somalia or
Wow.
Chad or Rwanda or Congo, in the same 5 year period. And the only measurable difference you will see is their skin color.
Wow.
And what opportunities they have. They could come in with the exact same language level, same date of arrival even. And you'll see that over and over again.
So in the resiliency programs, what are 2 or 3 things that you've seen really effective in helping people move forward in their adaptation to life in the US?
So one of them is celebrating again, skills that people already want to use and skills that they bring with them. So one of them is, for instance, the women's sewing program that I started, and that began with women who were really, really having a hard time. They were pre-literate in their own language. So if you don't know how to read and write in your own language, it's really hard to learn another one because there's kind of a rhythm and pattern to language. And so if you haven't used, don't know how to read and write in your own, learning a brand new one is just so hard. And that's very isolating. So a lot of these women, and they were primarily from Afghanistan, they were very, very isolated, very afraid to take public transportation, very afraid to even go out. They couldn't help any of their children with any of the schoolwork. And they are used to living in community, and they were, even to go and meet up with another family, you would have to take the bus or go outside, and everything seemed so foreign, so daunting. And you would think if you decide to do programming without asking people, which happens a lot, it happens in churches, it happens in organizations, you think these people need English classes, right? That's what you would think. Gosh, they don't know how to read and write in their own language and English. That must be what they need. But when we asked them, we sat them down over and over, they said, I wish we had sewing. Wish we had sewing classes. We love sewing, is highly prized in our culture.
Wow.
We want to be able to do sewing. And I looked around, there was nobody offering sewing, especially for pre-lit women. And there was nothing nearby. So we decided to start one from scratch. And so this was a partnership with my church. We had the space, and we built kind of a curriculum together on the fly. Got machines. I mean, it was this amazing feat. It just all came together. We are now completing our 10th cohort. What the amazing thing has been, because it's something people really prized and wanted to learn, they valued it. They're learning English at actually a higher rate because it's tied to a skill and tied to something physical that they want to learn. And so when you're testing for the sound to symbol correlation, for comprehension and speaking ability, all of those much higher trajectory of in that class than if they took a traditional ESL class. And they're able to kind of expand on their skills and build items. And one of the things that people have loved in that class is one item they get to give back. Because I believe everyone has the capacity. Nobody wants to be on the receiving end of things being given to them, like they have no ability to give back. Right. Everybody wants to be empowered to give back. And so in that class, one of the items they give back is a baby quilt. Huh. They sew that, and then they embroider at the back of it in a little piece that says handmade by, and then their name, for the first time in any language. And that's stitched and sewed on that blanket. And we get to give that blanket to other newcomers who are coming, who will either have a baby or have just had a baby, and they get to receive a blanket made by a woman who came just before them. Not only does it empower the woman who's giving, but the woman who receives it. They know that somebody just like them who has had similar experiences are able to gift them with something, and it's so powerful. And so all of these beautiful skills, some of them the people had, they just needed help to expand it. I have Ukrainian farmers. This man who is, he had this amazing farm in Ukraine. He speaks maybe 3 or 4 English words, but his skills in growing food is legendary. So in the community garden space that we've built, all the other people groups, like we have a Palestinian farmer next to him, and then on the other side is Egyptian, and then we have Burmese. they are all asking him for advice, but he speaks none of their language. So he just wants to help. And so we have been figuring out how can he teach classes, because he has so much knowledge. And when you look at the stuff he's growing and how beautiful, everybody's like, I wish Ivan would teach us what he knows, you know? And that's the thing. Just because you can't speak a language doesn't mean he has killer skills. And so we are empowering people to say, how can you teach us what you know? And let's figure it out. Let's do translations. Let's do pictures. Let's do all these other ways. We don't have to speak the language to make each other understood, the same language.
Do you ever look at your life and just feel a little bit jealous of yourself? Like, look at this incredible life she gets to live. And then you're like, oh, it's me. I love hearing the stories that you share on social media, and even in places where you've spoke and you've shared the calling of God in your life. And I don't know that I want people to feel jealous, but I wish that as people hear your story, that they will realize the hunger that they have to be a part of impacting the lives of valuable, beautiful, wonderful people. I almost every week, I just thank God for giving us the privilege of serving these wonderful, beautiful people. What a gift.
If I might share like a metaphor that I think is God ordained. So part of one of the things I got to build is a community garden out of a parking lot. Mm-hmm. You know, we depaved a parking lot, put in a garden, 23 different countries. People from 23 countries are growing food. And here's the really beautiful thing. So here's this whole thing about soil. When you're growing the same food in soil, especially things from, say, the brassica family, which would be cauliflowers, mustard green, broccoli, you know, things from that family. Within 3 years, you get this disease in the soil, and it's called club root, and you can't get it out. It takes like 7 to 12 years, you know, unless you rotate your crop. You can't get that bacteria out. But the beauty, and this is, I feel like is God's design, because we have so many different countries represented. All we have to do is switch plots, because people from different countries grow different food. And the diversity of the people automatically gives the soil the diversity it needs to have things thrive and grow. And that's God telling us, you need each other. You need every language, people, nation, and tribe working together, because the soil and the things that will grow will thrive if you don't have the same group of people growing the same things next to each other. And those people, whether they speak their language, each other's language or not, they celebrate each other. They help each other out. And during this pandemic, there have been those who have not been able to come out. Other people are tending each other's plot, watering for each other. It's been amazing to see the power of community. Wow. And that's a picture of heaven. I don't know what else is. That is a picture of heaven, and God designed it that way.
Right. Well, I think that's a perfect exclamation point to our conversation tonight. And I thank you for being obedient and for listening to the voice of the man in the boat with you. What a journey it has been following Jesus. And I want to thank you. Would you greet your family for us and tell us a little bit? You've got one husband, how many kids?
I've got the same husband for like 34 years. I think I'm going to keep him.
Congratulations.
I have 2 kids, and soon to have another grandkid in like a week. Another grandchild. I know, it's very exciting.
Christmas will be extra fun this year. Well, God bless you, and thank you again for your time. And we continue to pray for you as you serve Jesus amongst his beautiful people. So thank you, Tahmina.
Thanks, Joel.